Okay. This is actually the third time I've tried this. One time it cut off after 55 seconds, and then I was several minutes in and realized I never did click on the red button. I knew it had been recording. This is Immediate Background of the Revolution, Part 5. We'll take up right where we left off. It's been several days since I recorded that, but I think I know where I was. We had dealt with 2 of 3 events that happened in Massachusetts in 1772. They're not enough to build a protest on, but they show which way the wind is blowing, and they cast long shadows. One of them, just by way of a review, Massachusetts Governor Thomas Hutchinson announcing that from that date forward, all officials from the governor on down in Massachusetts would be paid out of the royal treasury, not the Massachusetts treasury. That would take away any control or power that the people of Massachusetts might have over their government officials. Next, partly in response to that, the activists who were working behind the scenes to steer us in the direction of independence, or at least guiding the protest, they might not have been quite ready for independence yet, they reorganized committees of correspondence, a letter writing network, a communications network, which gave them for the first time the ability to control the flow of information, to spin that information or present it in a manner designed to elicit a desired political response. They could coordinate. That response. They go from being just a bunch of people with the same opinions to being an organized movement. Going forward, take that out of the timeline. Nothing else could have been the same, because by the end of the next year, 1773. And this is not necessarily an outgrowth of the committees in Massachusetts, but it's the same idea being applied on a different level. There were committees of correspondence at the colony level in all 13 colonies. The men who would lead the revolution are becoming acquainted with each other for the first time and learning they have far more in common than they had thought. Without the committees of correspondence, you could not have summoned the First and Second Continental Congress. I will be so glad when allergies are finally gone. So the Second Continental Congress declared independence, functioned as an unofficial government for several years. And then once it declared independence, the old colonial charters, which were pretty much non-functional by then anyway, were officially invalidated, and you have 13 former colonies that are now free and independent states without governments. Something's got to be done. So normally it was the same people who'd been involved in the committees of correspondence who would step up and organize a lawful government. Okay, and that was trial and error, but we'll get to that in another connection. Thirdly, there's an incident that took place off the southern coast of New England in 1772 involving a fast, lightly armed British naval vessel called the Gaspé. I'll put it on the screen there. The letters HMS stood for His Majesty's Ship. Today they stand for Her Majesty's Ship. Well, its mission, the Gaspé's mission, was to try to catch smugglers along the coast. And the captain of that ship was an incredibly obnoxious man, bitterly hated by the people who lived up and down the coast. One night, and this has to be when there's good moonlight, it sounds to me like a kind of full moon kind of thing to do. What's about to happen? The Gaspé was under full sail in pursuit of a smuggler when it ran aground. Water's not as deep as it looks. It hits a shallow sandbar and it is stuck. It's not going anywhere till the tide comes back in. That could be hours away. Well, fishermen in a nearby fishing village observed the plight of the Gaspé, got into their boats, went out there and boarded the ship. Roughed up the captain, if I'm correctly informed. He had that coming. And then they burned the ship. They set it afire. That's alcohol will do that to you, I guess. But this is messy. And so, you have to wonder what was the first thought when they woke up the next morning. Something like, I had the stupidest dream last night. And the more they think about it, that was a pretty realistic dream. That might not even have been a dream. What did we do last night? if that wasn't a dream, we might actually have captured and destroyed one of His Majesty's vessels engaged in the lawful pursuit of its mission. We could be in some pretty deep doo-doo here. They might have been. When the news reached London, leaders promptly dispatched a group of investigators who thought they're just going to ask around and find out who did it, take some depositions, haul them into court, get them convicted. Because they couldn't imagine anybody but the criminal element doing something like that. What they discovered was that it'd been a while. Nobody could remember for sure. It was dark. I couldn't see. I might have had an extra couple of drinks that night. Can you spell code of silence? Nobody's going to rat anybody out on this. There won't be any depositions. There won't be any case. And these were ordinary, normally law-abiding, workaday people who'd done this. Stunning. And British leaders, they're shocked because they thought they'd been trying so hard to cushion the blow and make all of this stuff they'd been doing palatable and acceptable to us. And now this is what the payoff is. So they start from that point on taking a kind of no more Mr. Nice Guy approach. And we might have said, Mr. Nice Guy? When did he come by? I must have been absent that day. Sorry. So, 72. Now, 1773 brings another crisis, the third on the list that we showed you earlier. And this involves something called the Tea Act. This requires some background. Americans were Englishmen then. They drank tea then like we drink coffee now. Tea was a product in huge demand. And normally, where it came from was from Southern Asia, India, Pakistan, places like that. And a company that was older than the colonies, the East India Company, chartered by Queen Elizabeth all the way back in 1600, had a monopoly on bringing tea, spices, etc. from that part of the world into England. They were legally regulated. They could bring, for example, tea into England, but all they could do was sell it to wholesalers. They couldn't market it themselves. They couldn't take it to the colonies. They had to bring it all to England. So they would sell this tea. It would pass through the hands of assorted wholesalers and middlemen till some of it would reach the colonies to be, further handed down through retailers and purchased and consumed. That's the system as it normally worked. Until 1767, when tea was on the list of goods taxed under the Townshend duties. Okay, so the colonists start smuggling tea from Dutch sources to avoid paying the tax. When the other 4 Townshend duties were repealed in 1770, which one did they leave? The one on tea. That's the one that promised the highest revenue, and that's the one that makes the statement that, yes, we can tax you if we want to. Well, maybe. So that one's still there, and the tea sales in the colonies had fallen way off because we're smuggling it in from somebody else. But the company doesn't have any direct way of knowing that. So they keep bringing in shipload after shipload after shipload of tea, but not as many merchants are buying it. By the way, the merchants that buy it from East India in England pay a tax there, and then another tax will be collected in the colonies. So by 1773, East India Company has 16 million pounds of tea. That's not what it was worth. That's how much there was of it stacked in its warehouses. And the company, for that and other reasons, was in serious trouble. It was in some danger of going bankrupt. If it were to go bankrupt, it would seriously damage the fortunes of a lot of wealthy, powerful Englishmen. So, House of Commons is casting about for a bailout, a way to rescue the company, and what they came up with was the Tea Act of 1773. It's not a tax. What it did was it was deregulation. It allowed the company for the first time to ship tea directly to the colonies and sell it to colonial wholesalers. You've cut out a number of middlemen. You've cut out one of the 2 taxes. that tea, which is some of the best in the world at any price, is going to hit the colonial market so cheap even the smugglers can't compete with it. So, since they hadn't heard a peep out of the colonies in several years, nobody thought there'd be any trouble. British leaders still thought our protests had been about the money, which indeed they never really were. So, here we go. Word of this arrived in the colonies, and I always just kind of wondered. It's like you throw a little pebble into the pond and get this big old splash. The colonial response just always seemed a bit disproportionate to me. You do have your Samuel Adamses and people like that out there warning their neighbors, if you buy that tea and you pay that tax, you've just sold out your claim on any right to self-government for pocket change. That's going to have an effect. There's something else that historians have largely ignored, except for a person who actually teaches at our college, who's from Singapore, I think. East India had really got its hands dirty in Southeast Asia, had accumulated power until it effectively governed much of India and Southeast Asia. There had been a terrible, terrible famine in which large numbers of people had died, and the blame for that was laid at the feet of the East India Company. So the colonists were afraid this would be just the first step to basically turning the rule of the colonies over to that company and giving it a complete monopoly on sales of not only tea but everything else. So you get a big protest, which focuses when the tea-bearing ships begin to arrive. Ships bearing cargoes of tea arrived in 4 different colonial seaports. You got Boston, New York, Philadelphia, I think, and Charlestown, South Carolina. I think one of those wasn't on the list. I was a little surprised by the list. Well, in 2 of those places, it was simply too dangerous to try to unload the tea. Mobs in the streets. And the local merchants refused to accept the shipment. So the ships just hauled up their anchors and unfurled their sails to head back over to England with the tea still aboard. In Charlestown, they unloaded it, locked it in the basement of a building that still stands near the waterfront called the Exchange, and left it there for several years. And then later on, during the war, they got it out and sold it, using the proceeds to, in some at least little small way, pay for the war. Boston, however, has to have an incident. It's December 1773. 3 ships bearing cargoes of tea lie at anchor in the harbor. There's a big, raucous public meeting in an auditorium that still stands called Faneuil Hall, and they sent a deputation to the governor, and the governor's not budging an inch. That tea's going to be unloaded. The people of Boston are going to buy it, they're going to drink it, and they're going to like it. Calling on the governor to send the ships back, he refuses, whereupon drama began. About, we don't know the number, some say 40 or so, local young men came walking into the auditorium loosely disguised as Mohawk Indians. They got feathers in their hair, they got war paint, and they're carrying hatchets, which are going to come in handy. Another reason would be plausible deniability. So, with the crowd following just to watch, they marched down to the waterfront, boarded the tea ships, requested that the captains surrender the keys. The captains did. They unlocked the holds, and then, working in complete silence and military discipline, they brought up 343 cases of tea, smashed them open with their hatchets, and threw them into the harbor. Sometimes this is depicted as pouring tea grounds out of a box. If I had time, I did that. They compacted the tea into bricks, about 10 inches by 10 inches. Got East India logo stamped in there. And if you bought one of them, you get out a knife and shave some tea grounds off to make your tea. That doesn't matter. Now, this was a hugely valuable cargo that's just gone. It's also a bunch of caffeine in the water, don't you think? The fish didn't sleep for quite a while. In fact, it affected their evolutionary development. Tell me the truth. Have you ever seen a fish sleep? Oh, well. I'm not through, but I'm going to have to postpone this to part 6. Stay tuned.